Welcome to the Sunday Signal, the newsletter and podcast on artificial intelligence, business and British innovation. I'm David Richards. Here is the thought I cannot shake this week. Britain keeps inventing the future and then handing it to people who understand its value better than we do. We did it with the most advanced AI lab on Earth. We're about to do it again with the most valuable health data set on the planet. So today, 3 stories and the tracker. First, the £10 billion gold mine. A select committee has told ministers to throw Palantir out of the National Health Service. The company's British boss spent the week defending it like a politician, because that is exactly what he is. We will take his arguments apart and ask why an American software firm puts a Westminster networker rather than an engineer in charge. Second, the 17-year itch. I sat down with Richard Stubbs of Health Innovation Yorkshire and Humber, and he explained why brilliant technology goes to die inside the NHS even when it works. Third, my Yorkshire Post column this week. Would the AI we have today have locked us down in 2020? The answer is more uncomfortable than either side wants to admit. Then the layoff tracker, where the official numbers just got a lot starker. If you find this useful, the best thing you can do is subscribe at thesundaysignal.ai and tell one other person. Right, let's get into it. Listen to Mosley defend Palantir on the radio, as I did this week, and one thing jumps out. He does not sound like a tech chief executive. He sounds like a minister. The careful appeal to fairness, the way every awkward question gets folded back into a question about patience. That is the grammar of Whitehall, not Silicon Valley, and there is a reason for it. Mosley read history at Oxford. He came up through conservative politics as an aide to Rory Stewart and a councillor in Kensington and Chelsea. In 2017, he came close to standing for Parliament until the party grew nervous about his surname. He is the grandson of Sir Oswald Mosley, who led the British Union of Fascists in the 1930s, a piece of family history he did not choose and which has followed him ever since. He worked in finance, joined Palantir in 2016, and now runs a UK and European arm that holds roughly a quarter of the company's entire global workforce. What he never was, at any point, is an engineer. So ask yourself why an American software company would put a Tory networker, rather than a coder, in charge of its British operation. The answer is that Palantir's product is not really software. Its product is government. When you sell data infrastructure to the state, your biggest obstacle is never a rival. It is the state itself. Procurement, committees, ministers, the slow grind of public trust. So you do not hire the best architect. You hire the best contacts book. Mosley pitched Michael Gove directly in 2019 and won a Brexit planning contract. When the pandemic came, Palantir offered its services for £1, then turned that pound into a sprawling presence across the health service. The 7-year, £330 million federated data platform was the prize at the end of that road. Now, if a politician fronting an aggressive American tech firm feels familiar, that is because we have watched this casting before. In 2018, with Facebook reeling from Cambridge Analytica and Brussels sharpening its knives, Mark Zuckerberg hired Nick Clegg, not for his grasp of machine learning, for his contacts. The former Deputy Prime Minister became the respectable European face of a company that badly needed one. Then the politics shifted. In January 2025, 3 weeks before Donald Trump returned to the White House, Meta replaced Clegg with Joel Kaplan, a Bush-era Republican with deep ties to the incoming administration. The lesson could not be clearer. These hires are instruments. Swap the moment the weather turns. Clegg was brought in to keep regulators out of Meta's business. Mosley's job is the opposite, to get Palantir deeper into ours. One played defence, the other plays offence. This week, Mosley took to the Telegraph to argue that the MPs attacking Palantir were putting politics above patience. It is a polished piece. It is also an exercise in answering questions nobody is asking, while ducking the ones that matter. Take the operational case. He leans on Palantir's own figures. More than 110,000 extra operations, almost 300,000 patients discharged sooner. Those come from the NHS's own count, and they may be real, but they have not faced serious outside scrutiny, and critics inside the service note that some so-called waiting list reductions amount to little more than removing patients who stopped answering text messages. A claim you cannot audit is a marketing line, not a finding. Then the committee. Mosley says the MPs urged cancellation with no idea what should replace Palantir. That is simply not what the report says. The Science, Innovation and Technology Committee, chaired by Dame Chi Onwurah, told ministers to build a domestic replacement or find a British provider. Its concern was sovereignty, the danger of leaning on a handful of vast American firms. It warned in plain language that the current arrangement leaves Britain, in its words, at the mercy of foreign actors. You can disagree with that. You cannot pretend it was not said. And on data, Mosley is at his most reassuring and his most slippery. There is no central vault to seize, he says. Palantir cannot use, sell or move the data. On that narrow point, he is right. Palantir is a processor, not a broker. But the committee's fear was never theft, it was entanglement. The platform burrows into the plumbing of each trust through custom code, and the deeper that goes, the harder and costlier it becomes to ever pull the company out. That is what lock-in means. Reassuring me you will not steal the house does nothing for my worry that I can no longer change the locks. Here is the part the patient first framing leaves out. We already know what happens when Britain wires a foreign state-adjacent company into critical infrastructure. We have spent years frantically undoing exactly that. In 2023, the national grid began ripping out components made by a unit of the China-backed firm Nari Technology, on direct advice from the cyber arm of GCHQ. The parts helped balance the grid and prevent blackouts. We had wired a potential adversary into the machinery that keeps the lights on, then quietly tore it out. Only this March, ministers blocked a £1.5 billion plan by the Chinese firm Mingyang to build what would have been the world's largest wind turbine factory in Scotland. They walked away from 1,500 jobs on national security grounds, with the Ministry of Defence warning the turbines could double as surveillance platforms. Notice the pattern: court the foreign money, embed the foreign technology, then discover, too late and at vast expense, that you have built a dependency you cannot afford. The committee looking at Palantir has simply learned the lesson the energy world learned the hard way. Data is infrastructure too. It is the most strategic infrastructure we have. So what is this really about? Strip away the politics and it comes down to a single resource. Data is the oil of this century, and the NHS sits on one of the richest, cleanest reserves on the planet. Because we built a single-payer system, we hold consistent, trusted records on roughly 55 million people, tracked from cradle to grave across decades. No fragmented American insurer can match it. The consultancy Ernst & Young put a number on it: as much as £9.6 billion a year, once the data is properly put to work. Call it the £10 billion gold mine. Whoever structures that data gets to train the next generation of diagnostic models on it, and the patents and the profits flow to private shareholders, while the public that funded the raw material for decades is quietly downgraded from owner to data provider. We supply the gold. Someone else walks off with the jewelry and sells it back to us as a service. And this is where it becomes unbearable, because we have rehearsed this exact failure already at the very frontier of AI. The most advanced AI lab on Earth was not born in California. DeepMind was founded in London in 2010. In 2014, we sold it to Google for around £400 million, outbidding a desperate Mark Zuckerberg along the way. It looked like a tidy exit. It now looks like one of the great strategic giveaways in our history. DeepMind became the crown jewel of Google's AI empire. Its founder, Demis Hassabis, won a Nobel Prize and now runs all of Google's AI. His drug discovery spin-out, Isomorphic Labs, is reportedly raising over $2 billion. That £400 million price tag has not aged well, and the real cost, the capability we handed to a foreign giant, cannot be counted at all. We should have known what we were losing, because the people racing against DeepMind knew exactly what it was. When Elon Musk and Sam Altman were naming the venture that became OpenAI, the court exhibits from this spring's trial show Musk pushing one option hardest. He wanted to call it free mind. In his words, the opposite of DeepMind's one ring to rule them all approach. He told his co-founders that unless they hired the best people on Earth, they would, and I quote, get whipped by DeepMind. By his own account, Google at that point had snapped up something close to 3/4 of all the AI talent in the world. Read that back, slowly. Silicon Valley feared our lab so much, it founded a rival to contain it. We feared nothing, so we sold it. Now the same instinct that gave away DeepMind is being asked to hand over the data that could have trained the next one. The idea that we need a Silicon Valley giant to make sense of British health records is not pragmatism. It is a failure of nerve dressed up as common sense. We lost our best technology. We must not lose our best data as well. If Palantir is the story of who owns the data, this is the story of why even the best technology so often rots before it reaches a single patient. On this week's Digital Forge podcast, I sat down with Richard Stubbs, Chief Executive of Health Innovation Yorkshire and Humber, and a member of the regulator's National Commission on AI in Healthcare. He has spent more than 2 decades inside the system, and he punctured a fantasy every founder carries: the dream of one meeting with a minister, one handshake, and a rollout to the whole country. It does not work like that, and the reason is structural. American firms walk in, win the minister over, and walk out certain they have a deal for 60 million patients. Then someone has to break the news. As Richard put it, there is really no such thing as the NHS. There are 500 or 600 separately governed, largely autonomous organisations, and every one of them has to say yes for itself. There is no big lever in a big room. What thrives in Bradford can be ignored entirely in Barnsley. That fragmentation breeds a particular disease, the belief that nothing proven elsewhere can be trusted here until it has been piloted all over again. We have more pilots in the NHS than British Airways, Richard told me. And the line lands because it is true. Proven technology emerges, a local pilot is approved, the metrics check out, the funding lapses, and the whole circus starts again somewhere new. Meanwhile, the underlying reality stays medieval. In parts of the country, patient notes are still bundled into the back of a taxi and driven down the A1 because electronic records are not yet universal. Here is the number that should stop you cold. By one Royal College estimate, it takes an average of 17 years for a proven innovation to reach mainstream NHS use. 17 years ago, the App Store had only just launched. If we take the better part of 2 decades to adopt the present, we have no hope of keeping pace with artificial intelligence. Richard's prescription is not to crush local decision-making, but to be honest about the trade-off it carries. He wants a comply or explain regime. The centre sets a gold standard for a pathway, and a region either adopts it or proves in numbers that its own way delivers better outcomes for the same money or less. The sharpest moment came when we turned to safety, the word always reached for to slow AI down. Richard flipped it. Nobody ever asks the question, he said, of how safe are we right now. Nothing in the NHS is 100% safe, yet we treat the exhausted, paper-bound status quo as if it were, and demand flawless perfection from the software meant to improve on it. By holding AI to a standard we never apply to ourselves, we keep patients waiting longer in settings that are already measurably less safe. There are bright spots, and they show what is possible when the system gets out of its own way. Pinpoint, a machine learning tool built over years in Yorkshire, reads blood tests already taken and helps safely lift lower-risk patients off the 2-week cancer pathway. Peace of mind for them, freed capacity for those who genuinely need it. Ambient voice technology now lets a clinician hold a real conversation while the record writes itself. These are not science fiction. They work today. The barrier was never the technology, it was us. The third strand runs through my Yorkshire Post column this week, and it asks a question I have turned over for 6 years. Would the models we have today have told ministers to shut the country? Cast your mind back to March 2020. The plan was mitigation. Shield the vulnerable, slow the spread, keep the schools and shops open. Then came Report 9 from Imperial College, which modelled 510,000 deaths in an unmitigated epidemic, and suggested even mitigation could overwhelm hospitals. Within days, the plan was dead and the country was indoors. It was not the only model, but it broke the deadlock, and it did so before anyone outside the team could read a single line of its code. Some of you will remember that I was one of the people who did read it at the time and said so loudly. The code was a decade old, sprawling, with functions that looked, as the programmer John Carmack later put it, machine translated from Fortran. But here is where I have changed my mind. My objection was never that academic code looks like academic code. Carmack himself judged it held up better than its fiercest critics claimed, and on reflection I think that is fair. The scandal was narrower and worse. A tool built for experts to interrogate became an instrument of government before the public could interrogate it at all, and the danger of dressing a guess as a certainty did not end in 2020. This February, Britain's own statistics watchdog had to write to the COVID inquiry to correct it. The inquiry's summary claimed modelling had established that an earlier lockdown would have saved 23,000 lives in the first wave. One word did the damage: established, not estimated, not suggested. A what-if had been exhumed and presented as fact, and the same overreach that drove the original decision was being written into its official autopsy. So run 2020 again, with the tools we have now. AI-assisted models would not have handed a minister the answer, and that is the point. They would have watched first. Wastewater, admissions, genomics, and mobility read together faster than 2020 managed. They would have aimed at the network rather than the nation, closing the settings, doing most of the spreading and leaving the rest running, where the evidence allowed. They would have priced every path, lives against lost school years, risk against ruin, and put those trade-offs in front of the person who had to choose. Would they have recommended a lockdown, faced with a pathogen that spread fast and silently and killed at scale? Yes, they might. Sometimes the only way to break an epidemic is to break a contact network. But which one, and for how long? Schools, pubs, care homes, cities, or the whole country? That is the question 2020 never properly asked. And it is the question that cost a generation of students 2 years of their lives. Now this week's layoff tracker, the macro picture hardened, and the official numbers are now starker than any single announcement. According to the outplacement firm Challenger, Gray and Christmas, American technology employers cut more than 38,000 jobs in May, the sector's heaviest month in nearly 2 years. That lifts its total for 2026 to more than 123,000, up over 65% on the same stretch last year. And for the third month running, artificial intelligence was the most cited reason for layoffs across every sector. The emblem of the week was GitLab. The all-remote pioneer filed to cut about 14% of its workforce, roughly 350 roles, while exiting 22 of the countries it operates in. The chief executive pinned it on the agentic era and the company's new agent platform. What makes it the perfect case study is the accompanying earnings, first quarter revenue up 23%. This was not a distress cut, it was a deliberate redirection of payroll into compute, which is why the AI laundering story is now mainstream. Even the optimists concede it. Sam Altman has admitted some firms practice, in his phrase, AI washing, blaming the technology for cuts they would have made anyway. And the most telling line comes from Challenger's own data. AI is so far claiming the budgets for these roles, rather than doing the work itself. The money once spent on people is being rerouted to chips in the hope the machines deliver. When the big four cloud giants plan some $725 billion of capital spending this year, you are watching a wager, not a productivity gain. The bill has come due for human workers. The payoff is still a promise. So, my final thought. Britain is not a country that lacks invention. We built the lab the rest of the world feared. We sit on the richest health dataset on Earth. The thing we lack is the nerve to keep what we make. We sold DeepMind for the price of a footballer. We are being talked into renting out our data to the people who already own our best AI. And when something brilliant does survive contact with the system, it waits 17 years for permission to help anyone. The machines will not save us from this. The flaw was never in the technology. It is in us, and no model has ever been written that can fix that. That is the Sunday Signal for this week. If it gave you something to think about, share it with one person who needs to hear it. The newsletter, with every source and link, is at thesundaysignal.ai. That is thesundaysignal.ai. Please follow the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, so you never miss an issue. Until next Sunday, I'm David Richards MBE. Thank you for listening to the Sunday Signal.